Hey everyone, thanks for coming back for today's Money Not Math conversation. I appreciate my friend and colleague Ross Welte joining me. We were actually just kicking around some different ideas that we think about when it comes to comparing actual versus average rates of return, and kind of came to the conclusion that we should just record the conversation because we thought it was so interesting. So really, we're going to focus on the basics. We're not going to get into extreme depth like I know sometimes I like to do, and Ross probably gets a little annoyed with, but we're going to try to keep it.
I like to do it too.
What's that?
I like to do it too.
Yes, yes, we're both very analytical, but either way, I appreciate Ross. For anyone who knows me, actually probably has met him at some point. People that know me really well. He's made quite a few trips up to Thief River Falls, Minnesota, early on in my career, and even recently. But he actually lives down in Richfield, right?
Richfield, yeah.
Richfield, Minnesota. And where's your office out of again?
Golden Valley.
Golden Valley. Well, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, thanks for joining me, Ross. So now that we kind of got through all that, from a very basic standpoint, I think we can both agree, we can get really in the weeds on average versus actual rate of return, but from just a basic concept, what have you found to be like the simplest way to kind of portray that message to people? Or I guess could you expand on the idea you were giving me this morning that I thought was awesome?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a really interesting thing when you hear a lot in the financial industry about, not even in the industry, but just in general from the public or around, what rates of return they should expect on their money. And that when they're doing calculations to figure out their future, they're applying an interest rate to it without really understanding what that rate means. And like you say all the time, I mean, money, not math. Your money doesn't necessarily act the same way as that math that you put on the spreadsheets does. So I think, like we were talking about earlier, I think the easiest way to demonstrate that is just really looking at an example, like a really simple example.
Absolutely.
So maybe I'll draw it out like we did earlier. That might be helpful. So can I share my screen, Drew?
Yeah, I think you can do that from your end, right?
All right, let's try to figure this out.
Yeah,
I like how I just pretended like we don't know what we're doing on Zoom.
yeah, we've been using Zoom for a while now, but I appreciate you asking for my approval. And while you're pulling that up, I want to mention that Ross and our team uses the stock market. So we're by no means are we trying to bash the market or the tool itself, just to be very clear. I just get really frustrated when the information being used is completely inaccurate. And in this case, we're kind of we're not exaggerating, actually. We're just showing how using historical averages is not a fair way to calculate future projections. So I just want to get that clarification out there early on.
So here's the thing, is what we're going to talk about here is not indicative of some particular investment. This is for example purposes, okay? But we're going to talk about that difference between an actual rate of return and an average rate of return, and how not understanding that can lead to some pretty disappointing results long term. So I think let's just use the $100 example. How about that? So we're just going to do some basic stuff here. If you had $100, and let's say you could put that $100 somewhere where it was going to earn 4% every year. So just straight up, it's going to earn 4% every year, actual rate of return, okay? And let's say you're going to do that for 30 years. Are we good there?
Yep.
So I'm going to put this, can you see this calculator okay, Drew?
Yeah, our camera's covering a little bit, but I'll just move myself out of the way here. We're good to go.
All right, see if I can make it a little bigger too. So if we just have $100 and we're going to earn 4% on that every year for 30 years, that leaves us with a future value at the end of that 30 years. We have $324.24. Okay, so that's pretty good. So this is an actual rate of return. And I think you'd agree, Drew, this is where some of the problems start, right? Because now let's say you're gonna start to try to make a plan based on this, okay? So you say, wow, I've got 30 years left, and for this person or for this particular example, that $100 grew to $324. And overall, over that 30 years, what that is a 220, we'll round a little bit, 224% rate of return, right? Over that full 30 years, 224%. So now someone might look at this and say, well, that's pretty good. What was my average rate of return over those years?
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
Just for 2 points of clarification, I was trying to explain this to my wife, Brittany, and I know that the term actual versus average gets kind of confusing when being mixed all the time. What we're trying to explain is that average can look like this. Actual is a linear number. It's the exact same every year, no matter what. So hopefully that helps for anyone watching our conversation right now. The second thing, could you just write total return? Because I know as we're going along, we remember, but maybe it'll be easier to keep it clear as we add more numbers to the conversation.
So 224% total return over that 30 years. That's the 100,000 growing to $324.24. So here's what they might do if someone's trying to figure out math for the next 30 years, they'll just take and say, well, I got 224 divided by 30 years. Drew, what's that number?
220.
Oh, I have a calculator right here. I'm sorry. I'll just do it here. 224 divided by 30. Here's what's interesting. That is 7.47%. So what does this mean? This means this person's calculated that they averaged 7.47% over that 30-year period. Now, what's weird about that?
7.47% average is 3.47% higher than what the actual rate of return of 4% we know they got is.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Did they get 4% or did they get 7.47%?
Average.
Well, just what did they get? And the answer is both of these could be true, couldn't they?
Yeah, depending on how you phrase the statement, yes.
And this is the difference between math and money. Because the truth is they never got 7.47%. They got 4% every year. So here's where we run into issues, right? Now this person might go forward and say, well, I averaged 7.47%. So now for the next 30 years or whoever they're talking to is going to take $100 and do the math for their situation saying, well, I'm going to get 7.47%.
Yeah. I've averaged 7.47 the last 30 years. Why can't I get the next 10?
Yeah. And at 30 years, let's just take a look at what they're expecting. So we're just changing the interest rate to 7.47. So now they believe they're going to have $868.20 at the end of that 30 years. So think about this. And this is where it's kind of wild and it pays to spend a second on it. We know that this person got 4% every single year. Somehow at the end of that time, they looked back and calculated 7.47%.
Average.
And now they're going to use that to calculate forward and say, well, I must be getting 7.47%. So think about this. And we see this all the time, don't we, Drew?
Yes.
Imagine starting your retirement or starting your financial planning thinking you were going to have $868 when you got to retirement, and instead getting there and finding out you only have $324. What is that? 30-something percent?
324, I think it's like 37% of 868.
Yeah. So imagine thinking, because you calculated based on averages instead of actual, imagine getting to retirement with 37% of what you thought you'd have. I mean, there's just this is something we see almost every day, isn't it?
Yeah, and the saddest part is whether anyone's intentionally wronging people or not, the reality of it is, like, there's a lot of people out there that expect here and they're getting here and they don't know why, because of this misconception of average versus actual. And I think that's what bothers me the most, is that if you put bad information in, you're going to get bad information out. So you're only putting the average person at even a larger disadvantage when it comes to reaching their financial goal of successful retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. And it all comes from taking a historical average and planning as if it's a future actual.
Right. Going back to what I said in the beginning, when we say that, we're saying actual being the exact same every year.
Yeah.
Right. And I think another point to kind of expand on that of average versus actual that I think is also helpful and simple is the 100%, 50%, 100%, 50% rate of return example. Do you want to draw that out or should I?
Yeah, I can draw that.
Yeah. So I think, you know I'm getting at, right?
I was checking my phone. It was dinging. It usually doesn't make noise. But yeah, let me draw that out. So the same concept, right? We'll just start. We'll say you started with $1,000.
Yeah. And I just think through a different lens, it helps even make it clearer.
Absolutely. So if you start with $1,000, and let's say you're going to do this 4 years. In year one, you earn 50%. I'm sorry, you earn 100%. That's the right deal, right?
Yep.
Year one, you earn 100%. So if you earn 100% on $1,000, what do you have, Drew?
So quick funny story before I answer you. This, for some reason, of all the questions I ask, this one gets wrong the most because we're not taught to think in rate of returns, except for when we're being sold something from Wall Street. It's $2,000.
Yeah, you're doubling your money. Adding 100% to your money doubles it. So that goes to $2,000. Now the next year, we lose 50%. How much do we have? We lost half our money.
$1,000.
We're back to $1,000. And the next year, we earn 100%. How much do we have?
$2,000.
$2,000. And the last year, we lose 50%. We go out with a bang. What do we have?
Another $1,000.
$1,000.
We're back down to 1,000. We don't have.
We're back at 1,000. So here's where it gets interesting. If we look at our average rate of return, all we do is we have to add these four numbers up and divide by 4. Should I do it on the calculator just to be obvious?
Please do, Ross. My basic math is struggling these days.
So we have plus 100 minus 50 plus 100 minus 50. And that's 100.
Yep.
Divide that by 4 because it's 4 years. Our average rate of return is 25%. 25% average rate of return, and that's not dishonest because that is the average. But what is our actual rate of return? How much did our $1,000 grow to?
It grew to $1,000.
So what's that as a rate of return? My math might be off.
I think it's around 0%.
0% rate of return. Actual. So it's possible to have an average rate of return of 25% and an actual rate of return of 0%. These numbers are both true, aren't they?
Yep.
And this is where it gets really difficult for planning. The only thing that matters is actual. So if you started with $1,000 and ended with $1,000, wouldn't you kind of want to slap somebody who tells you, yeah, but you averaged 25%?
Well, I was gonna ask Ross, how easy would the conversation be every year, your annual reviews, if you could show everyone 25% average rate of returns?
Oh, that'd be awesome. Never gonna
They'd
happen.
be a little confused when they looked at the corner and saw they didn't gain any money.
Yeah. And I mean, this all comes back to the fact that the rate of return has been so played up in the industry, and there are so many things that matter as much or more than the rate of return.
Yep.
You know, in your financial plan. So I don't know. I think this is a really good discussion to understand the difference here, and what you use in your planning and the numbers you use is going to make the biggest difference as to whether you're sorely disappointed or you get what you want.
Absolutely. And would you agree that, we have to have some markers that we use for future planning, even though we understand nothing's perfect? We have to have some markers for what we're going to use for calculating.
Absolutely.
But we also have to do it in an understanding way that every situation is different. So when we look at historical averages, if you took a 20, 22, 25, 30, 35-year historical average of any market or index, it's going to look different.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it can even get more confusing when trying to use historical averages for projecting out.
Absolutely.
So
Historical averages have no bearing on the future actual. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah, it's definitely an interesting it's an interesting thing that it's so simple, but it can completely wreck someone's plan.